Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're getting back into the Joker series with a bit of a tale that tells us how the Joker had initially given Jim Gordon the recipe to who the Joker really is years ago. And what this happening is pretty clever, and not just with the Joker's method of delivery, but I believe also with the way that he did this at Arkham Asylum and under the nose of Jeremiah Arkham. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch us spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping back in, we go into another flashback with Jim Gordon, to where at this point he's been out of Chicago and in Gotham for some time, and he's climbed the ranks to captain, but not commissioner just yet. And when we go back to this moment in time with him, it's once again the very introspective take on what he's learned in Gotham, with also a heavy dose of the hindsight being 2020. But in this moment here, while he's waiting on some officers who went into this building, to where at this time the officers have just gone silent, but then also backups taking a while to get there. But then when shots break out, Captain Gordon lets him know that he can't wait, he needs to go in, because with hearing these shots he's expecting the worst. But also with him going in, we then follow along with his thought process of him looking back and reanalyzing the things that he's learned over the years, and it's here he thinks back to something that a fellow officer had told him in Chicago before he came to Gotham. Because back at the time, one of the officers told him there are those who end up in the right place at the right time, and there's those who end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the thing is for Gordon, like originally when his old partner told him this, Gordon didn't believe in absolutes, and he really didn't pay that way of thinking much mind until he moved to Gotham, and it seemed to be like a city full of the wrong places and only wrong places. But also what we end up seeing with Gordon going in is he notices one of the cops is already shot and the other is being held at gunpoint and being told to like beg for his life, and Gordon goes in, he takes this guy down and he tackles this guy through the window, which is something that I think is pretty important to show here in this flashback, because as long as Gordon's been physically capable, he's always been willing to roll his sleeves up and stick his neck out there rather than just telling these officers to do something that he wouldn't. But after this, while Gordon's getting patched up and the shooter's been taken into custody, and it's here where Gordon's then approached by your younger district attorney, Harvey Dent, who I'm sure most of you guys know that later he'd become Two-Face, but during his time as district attorney, we would often see him and Commissioner Gordon, rather than Captain in this instance, but the two of them would get along and work together well. And so when Harvey comes here and he tells Gordon about how his stunt had shaken up the shooter, but with this happening and the shooter kind of having a moment of feeling mortal, and it gave Harvey the opportunity to get in that guy's good graces by taking the electric chair off the table, and because of that the guy spilled some information about Falcone having a huge deal coming up. And with them saying this, like, of course, given their source, this could all very well be a setup, but at the same time, it's way too huge of an opportunity for them to pass up. And because of that, Gordon agrees to get some of his guys together the next day so they can check it out. And even though it's his day off, Gordon still agrees to do it, with him saying crime doesn't sleep, but his kids do, which has always been a thing about Gordon, putting the badge before his family. But then it's here where Harvey gives Gordon an update about the Joker, because he knows that prior dealings with the Joker have gotten to Gordon before, and it's for that reason why Harvey wants to keep Gordon in the loop. But when Harvey tells him that the Joker is not going to trial, but instead he's getting sent to Arkham, and it's right away there where Gordon's just like, no, like this guy's got to be thrown under the jail, because you send him to Arkham, he's just gonna dance right out the front door. And with Gordon saying this, like he sees that everyone else just sees the Joker as a typical criminal, but for Gordon, he recognizes that something is just not right with this guy, because he's way smarter and way more intentional than most would see at a first glance. And so it's after this when we then go over to the next day, which again is Captain Gordon's day off, and earlier in that day, Gordon and his wife are in marriage counseling. But the whole time that he's here, he's checking the time, he's kind of like, hey, this is taking a little long, you know? And it isn't long before Gordon asks to use their therapist's phone so that he can make a call pertaining to work. And on the surface, one of the things we're seeing again is definitely Gordon putting the badge before his family. But then we see this go so much deeper when he uses the phone to make a call for a squad car to pick him up. And I mean, that way his wife still has a car, so it's not like she's stranded. But this then goes so much deeper when we see after he leaves, he then makes his way to Arkham Asylum. And the reason why this is such a big deal is because on this off day, Gordon was supposed to be getting the different officers together and checking out Falcone. But instead of us seeing him go there, we then see him head over to Arkham because he just can't shake the idea of the Joker being way more than a threat than the judge or the DA believe that he is. But when Gordon gets to Arkham Asylum and he's given this tour by this guy named Frank, who then corrects Gordon and tells him it's Mr. Frank, which is almost like an ongoing joke for a little while. But with Mr. Frank giving Gordon this tour, he then takes Gordon to the secure wing of Arkham, to where in this secure wing there's only one inmate, and that inmate is Billy Sampson. And with showing this to Gordon, Mr. Frank, he starts to tell Gordon like Billy Sampson's backstory, which is something we'll get into in just a little bit. Because here, before Mr. Frank can really get into it, he's then stopped by Jeremiah Arkham, who at this point is the director and chief psychiatrist at Arkham Asylum. And just to give a bit of context about Jeremiah Arkham, because he had inherited the asylum, which was established by his great uncle Amadeus Arkham, where in the case of Amadeus, he was inspired to start the asylum after talking his mentally ill mother into committing suicide. And so for Jeremiah, like years later when he was like 16, and it was at that point when he, air quotes, found his purpose, when at the time he had walked into a liquor store and he encountered this mentally ill dude who had escaped from the family asylum, got his hands on a shotgun, and just killed everybody in that liquor store. And for Jeremiah, staring down the barrel of that shotgun, for him there was this moment where he was completely terrified, but then seconds later something clicked in Jeremiah's mind to where he had then just saw straight through this guy holding the gun, and I mean like all the way down to the source of this guy's illness. And with seeing this, Jeremiah just told the guy like, look, you don't have to kill me, your father's already dead. And with Jeremiah saying that, the dude was like, you know what, you're right, and he just took his own life. And it was right then when Jeremiah knew that he was supposed to follow in his great uncle's footsteps. But when Jeremiah took over the asylum, he burned the journals of Amadeus Arkham because one, he believed that's what drove his great uncle insane, but then also because he believed more in treating the residents by their actions rather than just going off of their thoughts, because actions can be observed and measured rather than trying to record the thoughts of these patients who will often say anything. And Jeremiah figured if you try to make sense out of crazy, it's just gonna drive you crazy. But with this method of observing actions, this is why Arkham originally started to have glass cages, but in this telling here, it's more so the case of Billy's family paying top dollar so that he would get the best treatment possible. And this is why Billy has the high price Jeremiah Arkham treatment. But also with this being the more secure containment within Arkham Asylum, Gordon requests that Jeremiah takes Billy out and puts the Joker in. And when Jeremiah tells Gordon that he can't do that, Gordon more or less hits him with the, oh, I thought you was the boss. And Jeremiah lets him know like he is the boss, but making that kind of change is a call that Billy's family would have to make because they put up a ridiculous amount of money to have this done. And when Gordon tells him like, okay, we'll just give them a call and ask him. So Jeremiah lets him know that he could, but he won't. And more or less Gordon says that's fine, he'll make the call and he'll ask himself. But as it turns out, when Gordon makes this call and he speaks to Billy's brother, and with doing so, Gordon explains about how the Joker is very dangerous and much more dangerous than Billy at this moment, who's heavily medicated. But with Gordon making his point and telling them over the phone what the Joker did with poisoning Gotham's water supply, and it's here where Billy's brother Sawyer, he responds like, that's fascinating. But Sawyer, he doesn't budge, and not only because Billy's his brother, but also because with what Billy did years ago, this is the reason why the Sampson family had became rich. And so to put a bit more context to this, we later get a flashback that goes back 50 years from today that gives us more of a backstory about Billy and the Sampson family wealth. Because when we take a look back into what was like a very Texas Chainsaw-like situation, but in this case to where the Sampson family had kidnapped a young girl and a bunch of her friends in order to cook them up and have them for dinner, but the last girl who was left alive, she ended up escaping from Billy and running away. And back at this time when this happened, Sawyer had taken his dad's rifle and he went out with Billy to chase after her and make sure she doesn't bring the police back. But as it turned out, with them going after her, they never caught her. But with Billy allowing her to get away, this had then led Sawyer Sampson to finding oil on what was still their family's property. And this is pretty much how the Sampsons had accumulated their wealth. But of course, the girl who was the sole survivor, she told her story, but when it was all said and done, only Billy was arrested, and sometime later he was then transferred over to Arkham. But that fortune, it's what provided the Sampson family with the means to request for Billy all the luxury and security that they believed he deserved. But in a nutshell, Sawyer didn't budge for Gordon's request, and so after, Gordon then radioed out for units to come to Arkham for them to watch over the Joker, but that request got denied. And even with Gordon out here on the radio trying to make this request, the reception out at Arkham is pretty bad at the time, so his radio kept going in and out, and he eventually got the message that the backup was denied because they didn't want to waste any manpower on just sending a bunch of officers to babysit the Joker. But then in the middle of this, Gordon's pulled away from his radio when he sees a commotion break out at Arkham, which sends him racing inside looking for the Joker, who he then finds in the cafeteria with the whole pie except for one slice, which is a complete mind flip for Gordon. And I wanted to say something different than flip, but you get what I'm saying. But this was absolutely the Joker messing with Gordon's head because he knew Gordon thought he was going to make a move and try to get out of here. And the toying with Gordon's mind continues even with the little things like the Joker calling Mr. Frank Francis, and when Gordon tries to correct the Joker by telling him that the guy's name is Mr. Frank, and Mr. Frank responds like, well yeah, my first name actually is Francis, because his name is Francis Frank. And it's little things like this that are like drops in the bucket of the Joker just playing Gordon into this position to make it seem like there's something wrong with him, as if Gordon is the one with the issue. But at this point, after taking the Joker back to his cell, Gordon just grabs a chair and he sits outside, and while he's out here, the Joker just continues talking to him. And it's here where the Joker gets into telling Gordon about his dedication to crime, because for the most part, Gordon has an understanding about good people getting pushed to their limits and resorting to desperation, and when Gordon sees that, he can more or less put himself in their shoes and think of it like, well, what would I do? But in the case of the Joker, Gordon just can't find that normal person starting point to kind of build off of, and for him that's the most unsettling part. And the Joker knows this, and he lets him know like something bad is coming. But the Joker, he tells him he's not the hurricane, he's just the dark cloud on the horizon, which really is just foreshadowing of where Gotham's going in the future. But on top of that, when he tells Gordon that with all the time spent thinking like if he could just catch people like Carmine Falcone, then who's gonna be able to watch people like him? People like the Joker. And when he says this, Gordon then rushes immediately to radio Harvey Dent, and when he leaves, he tells the guy who's like sweeping to stay here, watch the door, don't open it for nothing. But when Gordon goes outside to try to radio Harvey Dent, again the signal's bad, it's breaking in and out, and he tries to tell Harvey that he got caught up at Arkham and give him a bit of a heads up about the Falcone bust, but with Gordon just shouting a bunch of things through the radio that kind of land on deaf ears, and Gordon telling him, I hope it's not tonight because he's not coming, and neither am I, which Gordon says with him believing that the Joker is the bigger priority. But then when Gordon goes back in, the Joker's missing, the guy who's sweeping, he's missing, and when the dude comes back from like the bathroom, Gordon's then like, dude, where's the Joker? And dude's just like, man, I don't know, I had to pee. And it's like, just with seeing that, I can only imagine what this dude must be thinking like 30 years later, when Gotham and the rest of the world then realize how dangerous the Joker really is. But with the Joker missing from his room, Gordon loses it, he tells the guy to call 911, but then Gordon just finds the Joker back in the kitchen getting a slice of pie. And really, I believe it's here with this precise move that the Joker just keeps doing over and over again, with him breaking out of his room, getting a slice of pie, and then just going back, where it's like he's telling Gordon with his actions who he is, which is not like your normal average criminal, because if that were the Joker, he would have escaped while Gordon was here, or perhaps even before. But instead, the Joker stays here intentionally, in spite of the opportunities that he has to escape, in a way to show Gordon that he's just here to play the game. And all this time, while Gordon thinks that the Joker is the entire pie, so to speak, he's really and truly just a slice of it. Which is why the first time when Gordon caught him in the kitchen, the Joker had the whole pie, except for one slice, because that's what Gordon believed the Joker to be. But the second time around, the Joker only has one slice, which is more so what he's trying to tell Gordon that he is. Because again, the Joker told him, I'm not the hurricane, I'm just the dark cloud on the horizon. But with him giving Gordon the sauce, so to speak, and only doing so through his actions, for one, is pretty brilliant given the backstory of Jeremiah Arkham, who at this point really isn't paying the Joker much mind, which then gives the Joker the room to kind of play this joke on Gordon. But with Gordon being so set in his method of figuring things out, with trying to connect himself to the logical side of every criminal, this then causes Gordon to do some nearly crazy things. But then later on, in many cigarettes later, Jeremiah Arkham comes back and he lets Gordon know that Sawyer Sampson had changed his mind, because he decided to fund a whole new wing with way more security, and with doing this, the Joker, he's then gonna get Billy's old room. And when this happens, Gordon's then able to leave and head back to Gotham, but as he heads back and he gets a better reception, and he finds out that the whole Falcone bust was an ambush. And when Gordon gets there, Harvey Dent is pissed, because the go on this bus was Gordon's call, and when these officers showed up, Falcone had men waiting on them, and they just walked right into a slaughter. And Harvey lets Gordon know like their blood is on his hands, because Gordon wasn't where he needed to be last night. And speaking of where he needed to be, it's then later on when he gets home and he realizes that this was also the night that him and his wife were supposed to celebrate their anniversary, since it was his day off and their actual anniversary is on Tuesday. And really, with seeing this whole flashback, it really just shows us not just more of what we've seen with the Joker kind of playing these games with Gordon, but it's almost like we're given this new idea that's come full circle, which started with the idea of Gotham being full of people at the wrong place at the wrong time, but in the case of Gordon, it's almost like he's in all of the right places, but at the wrong time, which low-key sounds like a recipe for insanity. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.